So, like, what was the atmosphere around Mobile during World War II?
Very interesting. And I learned when I was reading the Life magazine series on World War II that there had been a lot of racial hatred and strikes and people fighting and rioting there with the shipyards. And the shipyards were very important, partly because they were building the ships that were using to transport the supplies to prop up England, and building the ships that would be used in the invasions. And I don't know if they got involved. Oh, they were doing ship repair on, like, a ship damaged in combat would come in, and they would let the contracts, of course, and they would be repairing those. And everything was race or color, or both actually. And like a welder, he'd be white, but they'd assign to him a helper, and he'd be black. And my father said that, and it was true of the railroads too, certain workers and certain helpers, when they became friends, which that was frowned on in their racially biased society, then when one of them took off a day, you know, to do whatever, the other guy took off.
Yeah.
If the white guy had to take off to do something, the black guy took off because he didn't want to deal with some asshole that he was be assigned to work with.
Yeah, and he didn't have the rapport, and they didn't know how they weren't a good team.
That's right, exactly. So I thought that was interesting, the way real people adapted to an impossible situation. And the rioting got so bad, I think they must have, they had enough space, or they created another shipyard and put most of the black people to working over there. It was that bad, and that life.
So what was causing the rioting?
I think the whites resented the black people coming in and taking jobs that could have been done by whites. They want to.
Wasn't there a massive shortage of people? It's not like there were white people standing around waiting for these jobs.
I think they just don't want the black people to better themselves. I just was hearing this past weekend, or maybe a week before, about in 1958, a black guy in Georgia was shot and killed because he was driving a new 1958 Chevrolet. There were people, I heard one person, he saw, it was in Mobile, he saw a black person driving down the street in a new Pontiac. This must have been about 1948. He said something like, "That's too good a car for a nigger to drive," you know, and he laughed because he was making a joke. But it's that thing about much truth is said in jest. You know, he was joking, but yes, there's a lot of truth in it. There was a lot of resentment
Yeah.
when the poor achieve some small measure of success. What's his name? Ralph. The guy was editor of the Atlanta Constitution newspaper. Anyway, he wrote a book about this. I think the title was "The South and the Southerner," and he was driving around in one of the more rural counties in Georgia, and he met up with a county agricultural agent. Now, I don't know if this guy, he may have been a federal worker, or he may have been state, but he gets it, and he's in the car with this guy, and they're driving around, they're visiting farms, and this agricultural agent, you know, is advising these farmers on how they can improve their farming operation. And they just visited a farm where there was a black farmer, and they're driving down the road, and the agent is telling Ralph, he says, that guy, he'll do well. You know, he listens and he practices what we tell him. So he drives up to his own house. They're gonna have lunch, and this is in, I think, South Georgia somewhere. They drive into the little driveway, and the house from the outside is all, it's not painted. A lot of poor people can't afford to paint their houses down there, and it's all, you know, the wood is weathered. So they go in, and it's completely different. Inside, it's a real nice house. They got potted plants. They got them little doilies, you know, on the couches, and they real nice furniture in the dining room, and they sit there, and then the newspaper editor looks over, there's a piano. In the living room, you know, someone in the family is musically inclined. And I don't know, spotless floors, you know, and the newspaper editor gets kind of real flushed, you know, when he realizes what he's seeing, that the guy has a real nice house to live in inside, but he lets it look like a shack on the outside, because that's how a black person is supposed to live. He's supposed to be way down on the economic scale.
Your family was fairly poor, right?
Oh yeah.
So how did your dad and mom and granddad feel about different colors?
I think they were brainwashed like all of us. Yeah. Another complicating thing about it was, I guess there was this kind of noblesse oblige. If the white person got a job and had a little money coming in, he felt almost an obligation to hire a black friend to come in and clean the house, or cook, or babysit, or take care of the kid. So there was a lot of that going on.
Yeah, that's amazing that they still had hired help.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You couldn't do
Poor
that
people
now.
in the South could have hired help when much more well-to-do person up north couldn't afford to have a servant. Yeah, it was crazy. And I told you my cousin, I don't know if you remember Katie, but she was telling me about, I think it was her mother, had a black friend and would have her come by one day a week and clean her house. Well, the day before the house cleaner was to arrive, reminds me of Michelle in some ways. Katie's mother would go through and clean the house.
Yeah.
So there wasn't much cleaning left. So when the black woman, her son would come by in a car, and drop her off. And they would have, the two women would have lunch
And they just talk.
and talk,
Yeah.
So they had lots to talk about. I'm sure each one filled the other one in on the doings of their children.
Mm.
And on the one hand, you had this background of the racial hatred. On the other hand, you had these, what amazes me, that people managed to live as well as they did, with friends who were black or white, as the case may be, and actually do that.
Was that, do you think church influenced that at all?
Church had a big influence. I talked to a woman who came by here actually, and she spoke over there at one of the meetings we had, and she was recruiting people to come and teach kids to read over at a school there at a church in Harrisonburg. And turned out her father had been a minister, and he was down there in Mobile. And then I guess when the civil rights thing got pretty serious in the 60s, he just couldn't deal with it anymore. Plus, I guess he was afraid his family was going to be killed. But he moved out. He moved further north to get away from it. But she said,
And they're black, right?
no, they were
Oh.
She said that her father would take her and the family, and they would go down to Davis Avenue in Mobile, which was like a street notorious for the black culture and the black people living there. And they would watch the Mardi Gras parades there.
Mm.
And I told Jesus, I would have been afraid to go into that part of town. But Father took him down there, at least for a while, and then before he moved out. And sometimes the black bands we used to go down to Government Street there in Mobile, and the black band would be in the parade coming along there. And the best marching band I have ever seen was this Excelsior band. And it was all black. And man, that drum major, he could kick, and he could put one toe up here and be standing on the other toe. He was that good. The whole damn band was that good. Not to start a race war, but white people just don't have it. They can't do it.
Yeah, I mean, Granny and Granddaddy, your mom's parents were pretty damn racist, which always kind of struck me as weird.
Yeah,
And
it was
Stephen-
weird. The whole thing was weird. The whole racial segregation was weird, and I don't think I understand it yet, except it reestablished as much as they could the antebellum social structure, the Gone with the Wind.
Yeah, so Civil War.
Yeah.
I mean, so you got pre-Civil War, there was a organization of society.
Mhm.
Post-Civil War, those people didn't just die, you know,
No.
they're still around, and they're forced to create within the new laws society, and they try and make it as similar to the old way as
Of course.
possible.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, and again, it goes back to like grandparents and stuff. They teach their kids and or brainwash their kids in churches and schools, and you know, at some point, you know, again, it just like we say, it seems weird because we didn't exist before the Civil War when it was normal. You know, I was told not to play with the black kids by granny and granddaddy, and you know, kids are kids. I didn't care, and so I would just walk around a block away from the house when I was walking with the black kids because I didn't want them to see. And I felt really guilty about it. And at one point I told the kids, I was playing with 3 black kids, and I said, you know, my grandmother told me not to play with you guys. And one of the black kids says, our grandmother told us not to play with you.
Yeah. Yeah, my father had a friend.
And both of us didn't care, by the way.
My father had a friend who was several years older than he, but it was a black kid named Jim. So people started referring to my father as Little Jim as compared to the other kid who was Big Jim. Then when my brother was born, they started calling him Little Jim and my father just Jim. So that's how he got the nickname of Jim, and that's how my brother got the nickname of Jim from a black kid named Jim. But
And there was a dig in that, right? There was,
no,
I mean, there's a slight insult in that.
no,
Oh, really? Okay.
no. And Jim, my father was Jim. People called him Jim. They didn't mean anything by it.
Okay.
They didn't. Some of them probably didn't know where
Yeah.
the Jim
Okay.
came from, and I certainly never knew until many years later that my brother's nickname of Jim came from that incident. It was, I don't know, insane. But one way it wasn't insane is it helped provide a low-cost labor source.
Just by underpaying the
Yeah.
black people.
That's all part of the low status is low pay.
Yeah. Yeah. But, I mean, it was perpetuated by every scale of the economic ladder, every rung. And I guess even the poor whites benefit because they're slightly less poor than the poor blacks.
Yeah. What was I going to say? Well, the thing about it was, another thing about it that I never hear mentioned is that it was a government program. It was a state government program, but that's neither here nor there. It's still the state, and it's still the state with legal power to use force to enforce it.
Yeah.
And so, if you go against it, then you kind of sort of a criminal because you're opposing this government program, which is perfectly legal.
Yes, segregation, but wages weren't cooked into that, were they?
No, they weren't directly, but the,
It was implied, but is there anything ever statute based on that?
no, oh, I don't know, there may have been a statute, I don't think there was a statute that directly went to specify wages. But one thing that happened was the black people's education or public education system was underfunded.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't get the proper education. So they took jobs at the lowest end, at the bottom of the wage system. And that effectively made them poor
Yeah.
and easier to control.
Mm.